Just wait a few more minutes and then we'll get started. All right, good morning to the West Coasters, good afternoon to the East Coasters, and good evening to our friends joining us from Europe today. Thank you for taking the time to be with us virtually. I'm Jessica Britton with PaybyPhone, and my role is managing B2B marketing in the North American region. I'm joined today by Jacob Greig, the VP of Americas with Liftango. Currently, all attendees are muted. We will be answering audience questions at the end of our presentation and encourage you to send a question in the chat box or raise your hand later. Today, we are here to discuss the mechanics of carpooling and smart parking. Parking is often blamed for worsening congestion and associated emissions, as it is seen to encourage driving by making it convenient. Conventionally, this is true, but it can also be used to mitigate these negative effects by tying that convenience to positive behavior like carpooling. Carpooling by itself has had limited penetration despite its vast potential to reduce congestion and reduce emissions. What is missing are compelling reasons to carpool over and above incentives like HOV lanes. In this presentation, we will share a case study, how the remarkable effect of giving instant parking discounts to verified carpoolers using a Liftango app linked to a mobile payment app for smart parking at a 75,000 student university campus. In addition to a dramatic uptake in the number of people carpooling when this feature was activated, the system also makes it extremely difficult to cheat, allows proper enforcement, and relieves the university administration of the burden of managing paper carpool permits. We believe this approach of instant permits on a daily basis helps encourage positive behavior, as each day a person makes a decision which either results in a reward or a disincentive. More generally, what we have learned opens up future innovation in using smart parking features to improve transport systems. I'm now going to pass it over to Jacob to kick us off.
Great, thanks Jessica for that terrific introduction. So yeah, I guess thank you everyone for joining us, particularly in the crazy times that we're in. I think on behalf of Liftango, we hope that yours and your family are all staying safe and sane in these kind of unprecedented times. So for today's webinar, we really have a few objectives that we wanted to run you through. So I guess as the first one, we really wanted to explore the role that parking plays in reducing congestion and more specifically encouraging carpooling. We've learned a lot in the last few years with various experiments in working with parking, and we think we've happened upon something that's very useful for the industry. We want to understand the behavioural challenges that must be overcome in shifting people to carpool, and also to illustrate the power at the end of integrated technology. So when we put these types of technology that are opening up together, what does that do in driving changes in commuter behaviour, which is a major focus really for our cities and our organisations globally. So I guess to set a bit of context to all of this and to set a wider theme, we wanted to explore some of the major commuting trends that are shaping a lot of the behavioural focus globally. And to our global friends, particularly those in Europe, apologies, a lot of the statistics that we're going to talk through are quite North American focused. We know that the themes that we'll explore run pretty true globally. Our friends in Europe are often ahead of the curve a bit with what we are in terms of tackling congestion and emissions challenges. So let's look at a couple of those things. So really, if we look over the past 30 years, our cities have grown. We've increasingly urbanized the way that we live. And this has thrown up a major challenge around congestion. So all cities globally are trying to tackle the congestion challenge and also the emissions challenge. And in North America in particular, the major focus and the lever that's been pulled to try and alleviate congestion has been trying to build our way out of the problem. We've created 42% more road capacity in the last 20 years. That has outstripped population growth. And so if the theory ran that building roads will get us out of congestion, then we should have seen a drop. But what we've actually seen is that congestion has gone up massively by about 144% nationally, and it continues to get worse across most of our major centres. This is coming at a huge cost to the economy and to people's well-being. A lot of this has been well documented. So, why is this? All this effort that's being put in, what is happening? So if we look at the numbers, we are driving more as a starting point. So we drive about 20% more miles per year on average than we did 10 years ago. Points to a lot of what's happened around the way in which our cities have expanded. We now have, I think I saw coined the phrase, the super commuter. There are people now in the Bay Area who travel over 2 hours in each direction to get to and from work. When we do this, we generally still choose to drive on our own. Over the past 4 or 5 years, there's been very little change really in the drive alone rate, and it sits at around 77 to 78% of people still choosing to drive alone as their main way of getting to and from work. The major shift we've really seen is the emergence of TNCs, of Uber and Lyft, have come into the picture, and the use of those has increased exponentially globally. It seems to be, it's struck a chord, it's hit a need, and people like to use these services. Sadly, all that has done has really made congestion worse. In San Francisco, for example, a recent study has shown that they believe the TNCs, Uber and Lyft, etc., are responsible for about 50% of the increase in traffic congestion. So the shift that we've made is actually, making congestion worse. So there's a response that's needed. And if we look at the focus that we have at the moment on technology, there's some terrific things being done around electrifying and moving to less emissions intensive modes of transport. There's also the emergence of autonomous vehicles and the benefits that will give. But if we don't change the way in which we currently travel and we continue to choose to drive alone, none of these technological advances will do anything to reduce the congestion in our cities. So there is a need and there is a focus in most cities and organisations to start to embrace and encourage people to share their ride to and from work. So how are cities responding? Well, they're shifting their focus from this capacity creation as the way of solving congestion to a more of a sort of focus on connection. So shared mobility is being encouraged. We're seeing the emergence of micro-mobility solutions. There are bikes and scooters in our cities that we've not seen before. We're seeing a different approach happening with TNC management. Some organisations such as LAX starting to look at in ways in which they control this flow of new traffic that has come into their cities. Congestion pricing has become quite advanced in Europe. It's undoubtedly coming to cities in North America. And we've seen things like carpool lanes and parking zones as well. And lastly, in the last few years, the emergence of the concept of mobility hubs, which is really getting to the core of urban planning and starting to put mobility at the center of the way in which we design our spaces. And obviously this has a major sort of infrastructure impact, which is very, very critical to the parking industry. So for those in the parking industry, for those on this call, what all of this means is that there's major change coming and happening for our industry. And this presents a great deal of challenges, but also a great deal of opportunities. And I'll hand over to Jessica now, who's going to talk us through some of the trends that she's seeing in the parking space.
Thank you, Jacob. As you can see by this graph, the parking industry is growing, and it's looking to continue through 2021 with an estimated capital annual growth rate of 10.6%. But what does this say? This says that we're growing, but as Jacob had showed in his commuter trends, we're not growing the same way we have in the past 20 years. Parking structures are a big piece of real estate, and the national average for basic parking structure is about close to $65 US per square foot. What this tells you is that it's continuing to increase. This continues to increase year over year, but on the right, on the right is a rendering of a parking facility in Calgary. With all these new modes of transportation and technology, we need to be able to create more flexible spaces to be ready for wherever the future may take us. So this is a parking structure that is being built in Calgary, Canada for $80 million. And it is 500 parking spaces, but in the future, it can be adapted to residential units or community space. So with all the different forms of, whether it's AI that's coming in, EV charging, are our parking structures in a place where they are supposed to be are they ready to be flexible? So those are things to be thinking about. Obviously, inventory management is key. Right now, everyone is fighting for that parking space asset. And so you're looking at different municipalities, organizations, trying to test out flexible zones for those TNCs, whether it is different rankings on the curb usage. You're seeing that in the city of Seattle, depending on commercial, residential, or industrial areas. Commercial zones, loading zones are more important than access for people. In residential zones, it's the other way around. Emissions-based parking. So we're seeing dynamic pricing trends are on the rise, and to try and change behaviors, and they're used to try and change behaviors to drive emission-friendly vehicles. So you're saying this in Europe, that motorists are getting discounted for or increased parking rates dependent on their fuel type. Mobile payment providers have an API to DMV and pulls license plate associated to that type of car. Availability in cars. We're seeing it is part of the future. An increase in number of vehicles across the world is impelling the demand for an effective system to find solutions to parking concerns. The issues of traffic congestion are rising at alarming rates across the world, impelling the need for effective and flexible park assist type solutions. According to industry data, 30% of traffic congestion occurs due to vehicle drivers struggling to find parking space. This in turn is magnifying the necessity of smart and efficient parking systems and valet parking operations. You're noticing that now we're going from, in the future, that in the palm of our hand to the dashboard of our car. So Volkswagen Pilot right now uses front and rear cameras to scan for free parking spaces. You see Mercedes and Bosch pilots using existing ultrasonic sensors in the car. Information is collected in central databases and shared, and then next step will provide driver with the availability information. So these are different trends that are coming around when it comes to the parking industry. Now, I'm going to pass it back to Jacob to tell us about more, how are our commuters reacting?
Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, so I guess wanted to explore with all of these changes and the focus from cities around trying to deal with congestion, how are commuters reacting to this? So what we're seeing really is over the last, just trying to get this to move. Had a little bit of a technical difficulty there. So in short, really, the car worship continues, as we saw from the previous graphs. We're starting to become more comfortable in sharing other people's cars using Uber and Lyft and TNCs, yet we still really don't like to share our own car. We can see over the last few years, very little has changed around the number of people we're putting in vehicles. It's actually trended down, which I think speaks to probably the fact that we're really only sharing with our family members, and the average family member unit has decreased. So clearly there's a need to focus on driving shared mobility and getting people to share. And as we know there's some changes coming, we're starting to see in the generation that are coming, they're the first ones that we believe will not see owning a car as their primary goal in creating transportation freedom. Yet it's going to take a while for that to come through the system. At the moment, and for the next foreseeable future, it does seem that the car is going to play a major role in transport. So what can we do to improve that mode? And that's really where carpooling comes in. This is not a new concept. Carpooling first really became a focus during the Second World War. It became a focus again during the oil crisis. So there's different factors that have driven it, but it's generally been when either there becomes a scarcity of vehicles or the cost of running vehicles becomes very high. We have a need now. Congestion is becoming, impossible in many cities. Costs are going up, and also there is a real resurgent focus on emissions. We know we need to do different things for the planet, and we need to do that now. So nationally, we've got 9% of people roughly carpooling. We surveyed close to 50 organisations that we've been working with over the past few years, and even some we haven't worked with, to understand what's the appetite for carpooling. And what was interesting is when we spoke to people and explained what carpooling was and how they could do it, that rate of people that would want to or should do it went up over 20%. So we have a gap between action and need or sort of suitability that we need to resolve. We have everything we need to do carpooling now. The investment that's needed is very, very, very minimal, and the impact is very significant and it's very quick. On average, our carpool clients save enough emissions to basically meet about 500 trees that have been planted in sort of the emission absorption that those trees would create. But the difference is you get that emission saving right away instead of in 10 years when those trees have grown. So there's real significant benefit to this, and the costs of implementation are very low, and it's right there in front of us. So what's been sort of holding it back is really it's been a behavioural challenge. Jessica, can you just help me move this slide? It's stuck again. So before we go into those, I've just got a couple of questions. I'd like to get your thoughts. So I guess the first one, do you or your organisation currently offer carpool parking discounts?
I'm going to close the poll.
Yep.
Share the results.
Okay, so only 30% are. It'd be good to get your thoughts at the end for those that are around, things that may have worked. And others, it looks like we aren't as yet, so that there's some opportunity. Very good, thank you for that. So just another question as well. So that we talked about the discounts. So I guess as a secondary question, are you offering, VIP or guaranteed parking spots for carpoolers? So do you have carpool parking lots that are reserved for those that park?
All right, I'm going to close that poll now.
Right, okay, so no, it seems very similar. So similar results to before, slightly less. So it looks like, in the population we're speaking to, there's some opportunities to look at how we could link parking to to start to push carpool if it's something that's on your agenda. Thank you for those. So look, now we wanted to share with you some of the things that we've learned in working with organisations over the past few years in driving carpool. So I guess to sum it up, we've realised this is a behavioural challenge. Technology plays a great role in supporting this, but the focus of it needs to be aimed at changing behaviour. And I guess that's really the sort of point of this webinar, is the power of parking in doing that. So we looked across the organisations we've been working with, and we've landed on 8 major themes. And they break into things that are barriers, things that you need to look at that are stopping people from carpooling or that are incentivizing them to drive alone. And then on the right-hand side, those things that actually shift the curve and look, the incentives for people to start to look at the benefits of carpooling. And you'll all have experienced these yourselves, I'd imagine. So the first one really is habit. It's hard to get people out of something that they've been doing for a long time, and you're fighting against the car industry, which has amazing marketing, has been selling cars and getting people to embrace cars, influencing the design of our cities globally for many, many years, and that looks to continue. So, cars are nice. Driving in a car is nice. So we've got to overcome that barrier. There's the effort piece of carpooling. So often what people say is it's very hard to coordinate. My day-to-day schedule changes. What will happen if my driver can't take me home? What will happen then? Technology can really help here. The dynamic carpooling service that we offer brings all this into sort of real time and reflects the way in which people now work and travel, which has to be flexible. There's the trust element. People don't want to ride with a stranger. Again, we've seen the power of technology in overcoming trust. The phrase, the trust economy, has been coined. Things like Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, all these things in which we're able to use a kind of digital platform to understand who is the person I'm about to interact with, and a level of trust can be built through that. And then there's the car worship piece. Often without really realizing we've done this, particularly major organizations have embraced the car. In big organizations still across the world, a sign of seniority and a kind of a reward for becoming a senior person is you get your own parking spot. All of these things encourage people to drive. And we need to look at those things and start to unwind them if we really want to embrace carpooling and shared mobility. So on the incentive side, the big one we've seen is I will carpool if my journey gets better. So what does that generally mean? I get a cheap or a guaranteed parking spot at the end, because that's a major source of pain in my travel. And in some cities where the HOV or the carpool lanes are in place, that also means I get there far quicker and I don't sit in traffic. So that's a huge incentive for me to pick somebody else up and change a habit. There's a cost element that's plays out differently in different areas. It's not as significant as we first thought it would be, but generally, the ability to share the cost of your fuel and running your car with somebody else is attractive. We've played around with rewards as well, and they have varying effects of things like fuel vouchers, giving people free coffees, insurance for their car, things like that. Many of the organisations that we work with offer these types of incentives to carpoolers, and all of them have some effect, but guess what? They pale in significance to parking, as we'll show in a second. And then there's the social factor. So a side effect of all of this is that people start to meet other people and start to connect. And I think in these current times, we're probably all starting to understand the value of connection, because we're being quite, stopped from being able to do it. So if we can just step back, Jessica, to the slide before. One back.
Trying, hold on. There we go.
There we go. It always works perfectly in the trial, but so we broke this down even further, and I think this is where the real learnings are for the parking sector and the role that you play in this. So when we surveyed all of our customers over the past few years and looked at the data, we broke it down into about 20 different forces that impact carpooling uptake. And there's internal forces, things that you can control within your organization. And then there's the external forces of the environment that you're in, which often you can't control or you can look to influence. And what you'll see is that the top two or three, both in the barriers and the incentives, are related to parking. So really, as the parking industry, you hold the keys to all of this. Nothing that we have done with any of our clients has come close to impacting carpool as parking does, both on the stopping it from occurring. So if we go and work with organisations around carpool and they have ample free parking on site or close to site, it's going to be very, very, very difficult to get those people to change that habit. And then on the incentives piece, as we've seen, offering discounted parking or premium parking seems to have the greatest impact and the most lasting impact on changing people's habits and pushing them to start to carpool. So all of these things we've spoken about, different commuter trends, congestion, all these new modes of transport coming into our environment that need a place to park. What does all of this mean really for operators? It's a whole new set of challenges. And I guess to summarize it, we see a range of challenges and opportunities. So on the challenges side, and I'm sure you're all feeling these to varying degrees, the growth is there, as Jessica said. We're still growing massively as an industry, but the traditional revenue drivers of get as many cars into as many spaces as I can and charge for those are starting to fall away. You know, the parking industry has often been viewed by the transport industry and cities as potentially part of the problem. But in shifting towards, you know, smart parking, dynamic pricing, linking in with other technologies and other services, you have an opportunity to be really seen as a strategic partner to the mobility space. You're seeing a decrease in corporate appetite to subsidise employee parking. That's starting to be seen as, you know, as not cool, as being part of the problem from an emissions and a congestion point of view. But I think it'd be interesting, and we're starting to explore this with some parking asset owners, is if you can then offer carpool spaces, does that conversation really change? And then finally around challenges, with all these new modes and all this complexity that's been added to the parking environment, it's creating a massive administrative burden for operators in validation, enforcement, and all the things that they need to do to make these new models work. So I think if we could just move to the next one, Jessica. So a couple of questions we wanted to ask, this time related to you in your parking capacity. So relative to demand for parking, do you feel like over the last few years and looking into the next couple, is your parking capacity reducing or is it expanding? Most people we speak to in parking, it certainly seems to feel like it's reducing. The pressure is always there, but interested to get thoughts from the audience.
Okay, I'll close the poll.
Interesting. So by a slim majority reducing, be good to get some more thoughts of that at the end. But it looks like in general, the trend is towards parking pressure increasing as a result of sort of reducing footprint. Okay, we've got another question as well. Jessica, if you can just pop to the next one. So currently, how severe is the parking pressure in your environment? Does it feel like your parking assets are overflowing? They're tight, like there's small complaints from people around not being able to find a spot? Does it feel just right? Or do you feel like you've got capacity that's available?
Okay, I'll close it.
Interesting. So we've got some places with the capacity available and others where it feels tight. Not many that are overflowing. So that's good. it's looking well for the future. Be interesting to see, I guess, how that trends, because a lot of the particular universities that I've been speaking to, everyone I sort of speak to, it feels like they've got 5 buildings being built and 20 parking spots to deal with it. So interesting to see how that will change over time. Thank you for that. Okay, so just moving on to the operator impact. So we wanted to talk through really the power of technology in meeting these new challenges. We've spoken about these themes, the need to start to embrace different modes of transport, shared mobility. From a parking perspective, the infrastructure impact that has on both cost and the need to extract value from it in different ways, and also the dynamic and flexible nature of pricing and enforcement that are really coming at you. So all of these things create friction and administrative burden, both for parkers and for those running parking assets. And technology really, when it's applied well, removes friction. So first of all, just to give you a bit of an introduction to the Liftango technology. So our dynamic carpooling technology really has 2 parts to it. There's a mobile application that for drivers and riders allows them to match with each other in a dynamic way within a trusted network. So what that means is we restrict the matching to the networks in which people want to match. So that's generally the organization that they work for. It could be the business park that they're a part of, or the university that they go to. All of our sort of research and feedback has been that when people share a common workplace or a common geography, that creates a certain level of trust that they're then able to work within. That combined with being able to see the profile of the person that you're about to match with and decide whether you want to, is going some way to dealing with that trust barrier that we spoke about before. The dynamic matching aspect, and this is really taking the old methods of carpool into a place where it meets the flexible and ever-changing travel requirements of the modern workforce. So from the days of the old notice board to then the next step we saw were digital notice boards, or what we call static matching, and there's a lot of providers offering that at the moment, to the next generation, which us and a few others are offering, which is dynamic matching. And what that means is that you can match with different people on different days. Our system is constantly trying to find people the best match. If your travel changes from one day to the next, then the matching algorithm that tries to find you a match changes as well. And what we find is that's really dealing with the effort barrier that I spoke about before. That plus things like a guaranteed ride home, which is offered with all services, increases people's confidence in using the system, that it's going to meet their needs, and if things change, the system will react. There's the smart parking integration aspect that we spoke about. So we've integrated the system now with everything from the parking access systems to payroll systems to give rebates on monthly parking costs, and through to which we think is now the cutting edge, which we've done with PaybyPhone, is full integration into smart payment systems. The second part to our technology after the app is we've got a web-based platform. We call it the operations portal, which we use to enable parking management. So we can map in all your parking assets. If you want to offer VIP or guaranteed parking, all of that can be integrated, as well as when we've worked with PaybyPhone through that portal, we're also able to offer combined reporting that looks at parking revenue, carpool uptake, emissions saved, trips, miles saved, all those things that as an organization you need access to. The other main piece we talked about was enforcement and validation. A huge pain point for lots of organizations. You've got many people involved in creating these paper permits and then enforcing them. You've got security guards and facilities people going around and checking number plates, all that sort of stuff. Digitizing the whole process makes it far less labor intensive. So through our system, we know whether or not 2 accounts have matched. We know whether or not 2 phones have come together from different places to complete that trip. And we're able to give that a live data feed to people running these systems so that they can do spot checks and validation, but really the effort involved in running carpool programs reduces massively when you embrace technology. So I guess that's kind of the snapshot of what we mean by dynamic carpool and what we think our technology looks to solve. I'll hand over to Jessica now, who's going to talk about the benefits of smart payment and mobile payment.
All right, thanks, Jacob. So for a majority of people on this call, you may be familiar with why mobile payments should be your leading payment method, but I'm going to just do a recap for those. And obviously, convenience equals compliance, data, cost savings for the operator, and future-proofing. Now, payment has always been a major pain point for drivers. It truly is what we could call a grudge payment. A vital element of mobility management and subsequently curb management is convenience. The more convenient it is for drivers to access parking, the more likely drivers are to follow the rules. And when it comes to convenience, connectivity is key. Mobile payment apps provide this. Increased compliance. So parkers are more likely to add time when their session runs long, rather than taking a chance that enforcement will ticket them. When payment is more convenient, parkers are more likely to adhere to the rules. So convenient in-app parking time extensions encourage longer stays, increase revenue. And as we see our operational mode shifting to pay by license, which is inherent to the mobile payment, data is rich on the user, a more personalized story which will help shape and evolve each parking environment. So we have all these data, the reports and the dashboards. So you have the opportunity to see revenue trends, transaction trends, consumer activity, parking session seasonability. But what does this mean and how do you make it useful? So benchmarking, understanding your own trends year over year, month over month. See what changes you have made that have positively or negatively impacted transactions and or your revenue. Help to shape policies moving forward as that result. Understand who your users are. Lots of users with few transactions each, or few users with repeat transactions. This tells you how to market and who to market to. Helps you understand the behavior of your parker to then tailor your services to them moving forward, incentive programs, etc. See top performing locations. Again, apply principles and practices to lower performing locations to get a more balanced program. Reminder that to create efficiencies is not to reduce staff, it is to help redeploy to other needed functions that are currently not being taken care of. Ambassador type programs, customer service, etc. Help to create a better beginning and end to that parker's journey. So we always talk about cost savings. When you have this opportunity too, and looking at all these data, you have the opportunity to make asset right decisions. And in truth, that is a cost savings opportunity for you. And then future proofing. Mobile payments are digital. No infrastructure cost is there. It's easy to implement, right sizing, also flexible for integrations to other services such as carpooling friends like Liftango. So now we're going to talk about what you've all been waiting for, smart parking and carpooling. What happens when you put smart parking and carpooling together? Well, I'll tell you a story about the small university of 75,000 in Melbourne, Australia. Their problem is they were 40% over capacity, spilling out to surrounding areas, which were residential areas, and getting lots of complaints from those residents. Further challenge to solving this problem was there was a severe delay to transit infrastructure, and the university offered permits, annual permits, which also created an incentive to those students and faculty as they paid for that permit up front. So you can imagine with that incentive, it it didn't help the capacity issue. After 12 months of conversations and planning, the university decided to remove annual permits. And of course, this is always not an easy thing to implement. They decided to implement a daily parking rate with a discount of 50% to carpoolers. To further encourage that 50% incentive and behavior change, Liftango app was introduced with PaybyPhone integration for a frictionless payment. This integration also caused no administrative work for the university and was easy to get started. Results: 300% increase in carpool rate within 1 week of the launch and reduced parking overflow completely within 6 months. So I'm going to pass it over to Jacob to talk about the next section in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, so thanks, Jessica. So yeah, it was it was a great sort of learning experience for us with what happened with Monash, and something that we think we'd love to apply with other organisations. So what we're showing here is probably it's a selection of the top performers carpool-wise of the organisations we've been working with over the past 4 years, and really the impact of smart parking plus carpooling on carpooling uptake. So all of the organisations here are using parking as an incentive, and the bottom performers here are getting a reduction in driver loan rates of close to 15%, which is fantastic. The top performers are getting up more around the sort of 20 to 25%. And something amazing happened when we integrated with PaybyPhone. So you'll see the difference in the curve. The orange curve there is Monash. So with all the others, the parking absolutely plays a role, offering discounted parking that was done through their corporate payroll. So people park and then, a week later they get a reimbursement. All has a good impact. Offering dedicated parking spots. So where there's parking pressure, the need to have a dedicated spot. Again, we map that through the Liftango app and offer that. Has a great impact as well. But all the behavioural studies tell us that humans love an instant recognition, an instant reward, and the integration with PaybyPhone really has allowed that. So, carpoolers find each other, they're validated through our app, they then hit a link within the Liftango app, the discount is preloaded straight into the PaybyPhone app, and they pay for their parking. And with very little marketing and fanfare, in 1 week, the rate of carpooling tripled when Monash introduced the integrated discount. So I guess the simple message of this graph is we've stumbled upon something very, very valuable, and you as parking industry professionals really hold the keys, in our opinion, coming from the mobility space, to enabling one of the biggest drivers of shared mobility and one of the easiest things to get going now, which is carpooling. So I think, pop to the next one, Jessica. Great, so I guess some parting thoughts from us before we open up to questions, and hopefully we're able to do that with you. Just some things for you to reflect on from this. So, are you using your parking assets to help meet the congestion challenge? And is there something different that you could do to really be part of that overall strategy that cities and organisations are trying to tackle? How much time are you spending, if you are administering paper-based carpool permits? So for the 30% of people, I think, that were offering carpool discounts of some variety, how much time are you spending on this, and how could you better utilise that time within your system to do other things? Because I think, the technology is there now to remove the need to have all that paper-based administration. And I guess as an operator, could integrating carpool open up new opportunities to fill your lot? So I've been speaking with a couple of parking asset providers who have lots that are not very full in fairly corporate type inner city areas. Could they offer an integrated carpool solution to corporates, and would that be more attractive than just a a basic parking conversation. And this one's interesting. Would your tenants pay a premium for a carpool parking spot? So we've had a few discussions with parking providers at major sporting stadiums and facilities, and parking pressure there is an absolute. Would a tenant pay a premium for you to offer a carpool spot, which means they're getting more people in per car to their location to spend more on food and beverage and everything that they make money off? So just some things to think about in terms of how you could embrace the possibilities that we've stumbled across here. Just hand over to Jessica now to take us to the end.
All right. Well, thanks, Jacob. And thanks for some of those parting thoughts. Well, we do have a few questions that have come in. So maybe perhaps I will start with those. And also, if you haven't had a chance to put in a question, please feel free to send us one or raise your hand. We'll be happy to try and answer to the best of our ability. So I'm going to go with our first questions that came in. And the first one we have here is from Perry Eggleston. How will the COVID-19 crisis affect the solutions in this presentation?
Dramatically is the simple way to answer it. So I guess it's a great question, and it's something we've been talking about with the organisations we work with currently, and some that we were in the process of talking with. So there's a couple of parts to it. I think in the immediate sort of now, whilst people are in lockdown, obviously carpooling is not something that people are looking to encourage. But we had a discussion last week actually with IKEA, and they've started doing modelling around which of the countries are going to come out of this first, and thus who will they be starting to send back to work in some capacity. And when they do this, they think it's going to be the UK, Spain, and Italy were some of the countries they spoke about. Now, in those spaces currently, they have a lot of their people who don't own a car or don't generally drive themselves to work. They rely on public transport and other things. Public transport may not be back on when they start sending people back to work, or people may not have much faith in it either. So they've actually seen that carpooling may be seen as this safest option in when people need to share their ride back to work. So yeah, I guess in the short term, carpooling is not exactly something that many organisations are encouraging. You know, social distancing is key. But as we start to gradually return out of this, and who knows when and what that will look like, the feedback we're starting to get is that it presents maybe the next safest option, in that you can restrict the matching to people that are just within your organisation. You can control how many people are getting into cars. You can, do the best around distancing, the guidelines we've seen around having someone sit in the front, someone sit in the back. All of these things you can control through carpooling.
Awesome. We have another great question from Julie Dixon, and this is for you, Jacob. Can you expand a bit more on how the phone match works between carpool users and how, just a moment, and works between carpool users and how you prevent abuse of the system?
Great question. So everybody has to use the system, you need to download the app, and then the first point of restriction is you need to use your work email to be able to join the network. And that trusted network is generally restricted to only being able to match with people that share that email domain, or a set of email domains that may occupy a business park, for example. So first of all, there's a point of you're not able to access the system and be part of that matching network. After that, as a driver or a rider, you can log your trip requests, a bit like trying to book an Uber or a Lyft or any sort of other, travel system where you put a trip request out, you say, this is when I need to leave, this is where I'm leaving from, this is where I need to go to. You can book that request out for multiple days in advance, up to a couple of weeks in advance. And you can do that either as a driver or a rider, or you can even put trip requests out into the system as being open to being either. Our system then finds the best matches for people based on when and where they're traveling to and from, and presents that to them. People are then able to see a profile of the person they could match with and decide whether they want to match. That match is then recorded in the system, and then people are able to track each other live through the trip. So the rider can see the driver approaching, and then the driver and rider travel together. And all this data is being logged. We know that we're able to see that a trip has been created between two different accounts. We're then able to see that two phones have moved from different places to a car and then traveled together. All of that data is captured. And so, you know, it's not foolproof. People find ways around these, but we found it's remarkably better. We've seen with most of our clients, the rate of sort of carpool abuse drops by about 80%. And also what we're able to do is all the data that we capture, we share in its entirety with the organisation that's running the carpool service. And you're able to use that to do some spot validation. We do things like we check if there's too many perfect matches for people, that may indicate that they're using two accounts, and one of them not being, you know, true, and you know, having two phones. They've figured that out. If the matches are too perfect, we flag those from our data team and give those over to facilities to check these things. But generally, we've found that the abuse becomes almost zero through the kind of digital capability of the technology.
All right. I have another question, a couple more questions, and we only have a few minutes left. Hopefully we can get through a bunch of them. So Ben Stewart asks, does the partnership require end users to have two apps installed?
No, I don't believe it does.
No, it doesn't. So again, I mean, within the area that you are, if there's carpooling with Liftango, then you actually, the payment is integrated right straight to the app, and it would take you to payment. It's integrated with PaybyPhone. Again, if you're in a different lot and you have PaybyPhone because you're utilizing them, then you would have them, but not to use this carpooling situation. You would not have to use both apps at the same time. If that, I hope I answered that correctly. If there's anything else you want to add there, Jacob, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think, you know, obviously it depend on the different technologies that are being used, but in general, for the user, the experience can be made very seamless. So the integrations we've done, we've integrated with either with PaybyPhone, and that was a seamless integration for the user, or even integrating into back-end payroll systems is also possible.
Excellent. I have another question about, which I think this is a great question, and I'm sure a lot of people want to know this one. How do you confirm the vehicle has multiple occupants?
So I guess the way that we do that is through the trip data. So the discounts and incentives that are offered are only offered based on the fact that in our system, at least two people have booked and joined and matched. So that suggests that a driver has come from one location and a passenger has been picked up at another. We have the ability for up to three people to book and match in a carpool, and so it's really the data that proves that. So we're able to see, first of all, that there were two accounts that matched. We're able to see that we can track the phones, so we can see whether two or three phones have moved from different places into that car. And then we're able to see whether the trip itself, you know, was completed. So that's the kind of safeguards we have at the moment. We haven't had systemic abuse of that yet, but people are amazing in the ways that they find to beat things. But that's the way that we do it currently.
Excellent. And just one last question, and then we'll do some closing remarks. Are there North American municipalities using integrated carpool incentives to manage public lots?
There's a couple, but it's not. So I think the BART system in San Francisco. They have looked at integrating carpooling into the parking lots. So they have carpool reserved spaces within their park and ride system. And through their app, you can register for a carpool, be approved as a carpooler, and then be given access to those carpooling lots. But again, that's done in a static way. So it's you register as a carpooler, you get given a permit, and then you're able to access the carpool lot. We've not seen anyone do what we've done with PaybyPhone, which is to enable that to be dynamic and day-to-day without the need for sort of pre-approved permits.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us today, everyone. On behalf of your participation in virtual parking days, to support those affected by COVID-19, PaybyPhone will be making donations to the American Red Cross. Don't forget to join us tomorrow, same time, for an online extravaganza as Carmen Donnell and Adam Kriegel look at the parking environments of the West, US and Canada versus the East. The debate will be moderated by PaybyPhone's CEO, Romy Valera. If you're not registered for tomorrow, not to worry. Please visit PaybyPhone's page on LinkedIn for registration details. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.